When I was young, I did something that which kind of surprised me after the fact. I never really grew up lying, I suppose. I mean, there were moments where I did lie about that donut, sugar cinnamon twist that I ate, and I pretended that I didn't. But really, other than that moment, I feel like I lived a very pristine life. You know, what's the one drop of something dirty into a vastness of this great ocean? And that's how I felt about myself. And one of the things that my brother said, and my brother never complimented me growing up, and he said, the one thing that I like about John, and I think that's just really just one thing that he liked about me and then everything else that he didn't like about me. But he says, one thing I like about John is that he never lies. And that was sort of built into my, not because I was morally courageous, but maybe I was just afraid to lie, I don't know, but that's how I just lived my life. One day though, my neighbor came over, and he came over with his mom. And we were playing in my room, and as he was playing, his transformer train or robot that turns into a train got rolled over and went under my desk. And he looked and he poked around and he couldn't find it. So I looked to see where this train robot might be, transformer might be, and there it was right there, right under my desk. I mean, it wasn't like pitch dark. It was just regular desk. It wasn't a low desk or anything. It was just right there, but he didn't see it. So he ran out, got his mom, and said, "Mom, I can't find my transformer." And she came in, and they were both stooping down, and they were looking underneath my desk. And she said, "I don't see it." And I'm looking with them, and it's right there. Like, it's right there in front of my eyes, and they could not see this robot. Both of them, they missed it. So first I thought it was funny, and I was just gonna let them kind of flounder about, looking for it, poking out. I was certain that they're gonna find it because it's right in the middle at the back of the desk. But they put their hand in and they looked. I guess they have genetically bad night vision, and his son got it from his mom. I don't know, they couldn't see. And then I didn't say anything. I let them look, I let them search, but I didn't say anything. And they actually gave up after looking under the desk for 5 minutes. I was very curious. One, why can't you see the robot? It's right there. Like, you don't have to look, it's just right there. And two, if you know that you dropped it under the desk, why would you give up in 5 minutes? And all these weird questions. I was grade 3, and I was going through my little brain. And I said to myself, well, maybe you don't deserve it. Maybe I need to play with it, because you can't find it. It's right there, but you can't see it. So what I ended up doing was that I kept my mouth shut, and they left. And there was like a pang of guilt that I had in my heart, but I let that robot sit there for about 3 days, I think, because I knew it was wrong. But after 3 days, my guilty conscience have rested and settled, and I took it out, and now that robot was mine. I think about this story time to time in my adult life to remind myself that even though I thought it was very unlikely of me to lie like that, to hide the truth, that is what I did. And I should never, and this is a Bible talk, I should never trust in my past success. That if I didn't steal for the last 30 years, I should never trust that, because I can stoop low anytime when there is an opportunity. David's story is that story. Very unlikely person committing a sin that is also very unlikely and over the top and extreme. as we have journeyed through 1st and 2nd Samuel, David was fantastic. I mean, if you want a biblical hero, David is the one. He fought Goliath. He saved Saul's life many times, although he tried to kill David multiple times. And he lamented over the death of his enemies. And he took in Mephibosheth, son of the grandson of his arch nemesis, Saul. And he gave him king's property and king's wealth and king's honor. And he bestowed that upon him. And when we look at David, he is the least likely person to commit any heinous crime or any type of moral fault. But in this text, what we find is that not only anyone can sin, even the best of us can sin. As Chelsea have read the text for us and summarized it for us, David was in his palace. It was springtime. And if you understand springtime, that's a season where you go out and kings fight for property, for land, and they defend their kingdom. And here David was sitting in his couch, or lying and reclining in his couch. And he didn't go to a battle with his soldiers, but he was kind of lounging around his palace, not doing a thing. So the question is, how does David go from this amazing, godly fellow to someone who takes someone else's wife, sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, and in order to cover that up, calls her husband back from the battlefield, get him drunk so that he would go back home and sleep with his wife. And when that failed, he has orchestrated an elaborate cover-up scheme and get Uriah killed, Bathsheba's husband killed in the thicket of the battle. How does someone like David go from someone who has so much faith in God to someone who is coward and sins so deeply and extravagantly and lavishly? And not only that, he covers up his sin. I think there are two things that we can look at. Why does anybody sin? One. And that two, I guess the main point is that even the best of us, most unlikely person to sin in our community, will one day sin. And that they will fail, and we will all fail. Sin, when we think about it, and crime, when we think about it, is for those who grew up in maybe a neighborhood where they were poor and they don't have the parental control or guidance. And maybe crime like this belongs to someone who has history of being a predator and someone who has a history of being creepy and perverted. Oh. And maybe when we think of a sin and crime like this, we have stereotype image in our mind of who would do something like that. And we say to ourselves, oh, I would never do that. Or, even if I tempted, I would overcome that temptation. It's not me, it's someone else. And something like this would never, ever happen to me. I would never do this, in other words. But I want us to have a sobering moment here today and realize that even though you may think you're the least likely person to sin, to fall, to make a mistake, and do things that is just unthinkable, but you might get there yourself, that you and I are perfectly capable of doing something like this. And I want us to grapple that for a moment, that you have never done anything like this, but at the same time, that you are perfectly capable of becoming like David. We read 1st and 2nd Samuel, and we see Saul, who is jealous, who is trying to climb from the bottom up to become the best king that he can be. And we say to ourselves, I'll never be like that man. But really, David has become just like Saul, killing and planning and killing other people along, misusing his royal resources, just like Saul did. And it just took one chapter to do that. All of his glory, all of his wonderful feats have come down and boiled down, and now it's just sliding down this cliff. Again, let me belabor this point. All of us are capable of becoming like Saul and becoming like David unless we trust in the Lord and we give and we recognize that we are frail and we are weak and we are in need of a Savior. Now, why do I say that? Isn't David an exception? Isn't it because David has power and has resources and maybe he's always had this? And there are two reasons why I'm saying that anyone can sin and even the best of us will sin. Number one, David doesn't sin because he doesn't commit adultery because he was it was clubbing at night. And he had a massive harem, and this is his lifestyle. I want you to take a look. He was one, he no longer cared about defending the borders. Remember why David fought Goliath? Because the land is God's, it's Yahweh's. Doesn't belong to you, Goliath, even though you're a giant. It belongs to God, and I will fight for it. That passion has died. He has fought so many times and he won so many times and he has expanded his borders so many times and people were in fear of him. Now he is bored. He has been there. He has done that. He needs something new to keep him entertained and keep him passionate. If you look at the text, he goes from couch to roof. He has delegated the war to his general Joab and said, I found someone who can do just as a good job. You take it. I'm going to go from my couch and I'm going to go to my patio, and that's my life. All of us will one day experience this kind of boredom. Every one of us will experience boredom. David didn't sin because he was doing drugs and he had past habits that kind of hinted at this new sin that he is committing. No, he was bored. He gotten used to what he has accomplished. Remember the time when maybe for the Frosh, for those university students, all you wanted to do was get into university and get into your program. You worked hard and you were passionate about it and you wrote it in your entrance essay, interview essay, why you want this program and why you want to be in this university. And you write, ever since I was a baby, right out of my mother's womb, I have passion for medicine, or I have passion for engineering or humanities or arts. And this is why I want to do it, to save the humanity and be a blessing. But after first weeks, the Frosh week is over and you start attending your class and you realize, oh my gosh, this is tough. This is boring. This is demanding. I don't like it. And all that passion that you have for school and for your program is gone. And just wait for it, because we experience it as an older adults too. When we're single, we want to get married. And once we get married, we get bored of that. And once we get married, we want to have kids. And then we're so passionate about our kids and we buy a book this thick, no joke, that has every single name on this planet and the meaning behind it from every culture. and we pick our names carefully, and then when we have our kids and we have sleepless nights, and you realize that this thing is just peeing and pooping out so fast, and then you're changing diapers, and that gets boring, and life becomes so mundane. Every time you and I accomplish something, life becomes so mundane and boring. We say things like, what is the meaning of life? I wake up, I go to work, or I go to school, I come back home, and repeat the next day, same thing. You know, one time I watched this documentary with my mom. It was the strangest thing ever, but it was on Madonna. And I don't know how much she understood, or she was just staring at the tube, and we're having lunch. And I was so shocked that Madonna, if you know who she is, she's a musician, and she said, my life is so boring. I go, I fly somewhere, and I do my concert, and after my concert, I go to a club, we drink, we party, and then next day, repeat again. She says, this is my life, this is what I do, and it's just so boring. And I remember thinking to myself, what do you mean? You had like thousands of people at your concert, and you have all this money and fame and everything at your disposal. And you're partying with, I don't know who's there, but all these other celebrities, and everybody's gawking you and looking at you, and they want to be with you, and they want your autograph, and they want to work with you, and yet you say, my life is so boring. And trust me, it doesn't matter what you accomplish, doesn't matter what you have, doesn't matter how many times you get the things that you want, you will one day find your job boring. You will find your spouse that was so beautiful and handsome and funny and humorous boring one day. And just life is so mundane. And in that boredom, folks, we make most godless decisions, because what we are after is not righteousness. It's not passionate faith in our boredom, but something new, something different. And that's what we're after. Even the most unlikely person, even the most righteous person, even the nicest and the best of us will one day be strongly tempted, because we will all experience boredom. It's inevitable. You will feel it one day. It's just that you and I today make somewhat of socially acceptable decisions when we are tempted in our boredom. We buy things, we take a trip, or I don't know, we switch our jobs, or we move and get a new job somewhere in a branch, do the same thing, but in a new location. But notice that as you make these socially acceptable choices, nothing compared to what David has done. God has never once entered into your life, because you're looking for something new, something different, something to get you out of your boredom. No, we don't kill people. We don't plan how to kill people. We don't take other people's spouse into our bedroom. No, those things are so socially unacceptable. And we don't have means to cover up those things. That's why we don't do them. But in our boredom, we make decisions that are just godless. We just want to be entertained and get out of this boredom. And our culture is geared towards all of us relieving our boredom rather than living in God, in righteousness and godliness. All of us, any one of us, and even the best of us, are capable of sinning. Secondly, because you're not a moral monster. You're not a sociopath, or you're not a psychopath. Your morality is intact. And why do I say that? Remember when David had sinned, and he slept with his soldier's wife? In order to cover that up, he tried to bring him home. And when that didn't work, he killed him off in the battlefield. And you would think, well, I would never do that because I know that is wrong. I know that that is improper. I know that's immoral and that is just so icky. Who would ever do that? David's morality must be out of whack. There are people who just grew up that way or born that way or raised that way. And people who like don't mind stealing, don't mind using things and then return it to Costco and pretend they didn't use it. I'm not like that. That only happens to those people. Sin like this or any kind of serious sin that we frown upon is committed by people whose morality is off. But this story tells otherwise. After David has committed his sin and his crime, Prophet Nathan comes and tells a story. And I will tell this story in the briefest form, but it goes something like this. There was a rich man who had many sheep in his flock, innumerable amount of sheep. But one day he looks over his fence and across the field, over his vast ranch and borders of his property. And he sees that there's one poor man on the other side of his property with a humble cabin. And there he had a lamb that the poor man, his neighbor, had. And it was the only lamb that he had to his name. And he loved that lamb and he cared for that lamb. And when the rich man saw that poor man's lamb, he coveted and he wanted it. And he stole it and he killed the owner. Nathan told that story to King David as if that was a real story. And the prophet Nathan said to David, what should happen to that man? What will you do to that man who has stolen the single lamb that this poor man had? And when David heard that story, he was furious and he was burning with anger. And David said, take back what he stole and put that man to death. Kill him. That's injustice. That's a high crime deserving of death for not only the murder that he has committed, but the context in which he has committed. The motivation is vile. His crime deserves nothing less than capital punishment. Kill that man. And Nathan says, well, that man is you. That man, David, that you're upset about is you. Notice here that when Nathan told that story, that fake hypothetical story, which he told as if it was a real story, David didn't say, well, maybe the rich man, I don't know, he just needed one more, or like, that's what happens when you're poor. Or when you're poor, you're a loser, and rich people should be able to walk all over the poor people. We should be able to break them. It's not about morality or justice, but it's all about just rich people getting richer. David didn't say that. His sense of justice, his sense of righteousness was 100% in there. His reaction was the key. Kill that man and restore everything. We don't sin because our morality one day just turns off. We don't sin because sin is just for those people who have tattoos and do drugs and steal time to time, and it's not reserved in the spheres of those people, but it is in all of us. It's not because some people lack morality. No, David's morality was all in there. It was still intact, just like your morality is intact, and you know precisely what is wrong and what is right. there's a part 2 to the transformer train or robot, whatever story that I told you in the beginning. So 3 days later, I took out that train, that robot, and I began to play with it. And as I began to play with it, inevitably, my friend and his mom actually was a friend of my aunt when I was living with her. And so we, we're close. They came over often. And I said to myself, well, I'm gonna play with this toy, and when they come over, I'm just gonna say that I found it outside, like brilliant cover up, right? That's just gonna make sense. Like I found exactly the same transformer robot outside. I thought it's gonna work, grade 3. So brilliant plan to cover up. So they came over and I was playing with it, very confident, like I was playing with it in front of them. And then my friend's mom saw me playing with that robot and she came over and she grabbed it. And I tried to stay calm and she said, oh my gosh, this looks just like my son's robot. But I can see in her eyes that she knew that wasn't hers. That wasn't her son's, that this was mine. And she kept saying, it looks just like it. It was just exactly, this is exactly the same. Oh, I think it's his, she said. But I knew she was making that up. Because she didn't say, why are you playing with my son's toy? She didn't come and say, hey, where did you find that? She started with, this looks like. And she kept repeating that until she convinced herself that it is his. And her son came over and looked at it, and she said, this looks just like yours. Therefore, it is yours. And I can see in my friend's eyes that he knew that toy wasn't his, although it is. Like you and I know, because we have the privilege of breaking the fourth wall. And we knew, but they both knew that that wasn't theirs. But they convinced themselves that it was theirs and they took it. And I wasn't courageous enough or brazen enough to say, no, that's mine, I found that outside. I just let it go because, you know, it was theirs. But guess what happened? After they took the robot, I said to myself, wow, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe that they stole my robot from me because they knew that wasn't theirs. And you know, my sense of morality was still there. You know, they stole something from me. They knew that wasn't theirs. You know, like, of course I stole it from them, but that doesn't matter. They stole from me. My sense of righteousness got ignited. And I started saying, oh, those people, she should have known better. She's an adult. She stole something from me. You see, my sense of morality was still there, but not pointing it to myself, but to someone else. You and I don't sin because our morality is turned off. It's just that our moral compass rarely points to ourselves. And we don't recognize our brokenness, our faults, and we don't recognize the things that we do when we are bored and we're tired and we just want something new. But it is often pointing at other people. David's sin is serious, but he could not spot the sin himself until all the sins that he tried to cover up wasn't solved until God sent Nathan to uncover his sin. Nathan came, risked his life, and told that story and pointed the moral compass directly at David's heart and said, that man is you. Today, as we read this text, can we honestly say, and deeply and sincerely say, David is me. that man is me. I haven't committed the crime because I'm busy at the moment. I'm not bored enough yet. But that temptation will come. I didn't sin, I am perfectly capable of sinning, even though my morality and my image of myself tells me that I'm okay and I am good and I've never done anything like that. And I frown upon anyone who does that kind of thing. No, you have to simply say to yourself, this man is me. This person is me. I'm capable of this kind of sin. I wonder if our community can be like this community that we see in the text, where we have people that we can turn to and point us to the right direction, that can speak to us gently on what we are doing wrong. It's not easy to come up with some nifty story like this, like Nathan. I mean, that's difficult. And it's not easy, and it's not every day we run into this kind of sin in our community. But we can still spur one another into righteousness. We can still be like Nathan in this story, in the sense that maybe we can ask some questions as we meet with one another. How is your worship? How is your prayer life? Do you do your QT? Not because, and you don't have to be someone who is like crying at every worship or reading the Bible every single day and praying every single moment. You can be the biggest failure in that department. Like you haven't touched the Bible. Maybe you read like once a week for like 2 minutes. But you can still ask that question to someone else, not because you're perfect, but you want to know what they're doing and how they are doing. Imagine you ask someone, hey, how's your QT? Do you read the Bible? Do you meditate? How's that going for you? And that person says, no, I haven't read my Bible in like 6 months. And so you meet somebody else in the community. Hey, how's your QT life? Well, I don't really pray. I don't read the Bible. I haven't done that in 2 years, 3 years. And you keep asking and you realize, oh, this thing is pandemic. This is epidemic. This is something that is prevalent in our community. And we need to do something about this. Or conversely, you ask someone and you say, hey, how's your QT life? How's your life Devo going? And that person says, well, I've been reading every single day for the last 2 months, and it's been a blessing, and it's been amazing. And you ask, how do you do that? What's your secret sauce? And there's a conversation for you to heal yourself and begin your own spiritual discipline. There are many godly questions, like, what are you thankful for? To remind yourself that in your boredom, really, you ought to be incredibly grateful for the things that you have. That the things that you've been doing over and over, same thing that you've been performing over a day after day, week after week, months after months, year after year, is actually a gift and is a wonderful thing, and you should really cherish it. Cooking for your kids, driving your kids, sitting down in the same spot in the library, and yet again writing another essay for the same class. Going to the same cubicle every single day and punching in same data every single day. Do you see it as a calling and a blessing? Because even if you worked in a UN council saving the world, one day you will feel the same boredom. See everything you do in your life as a calling and a blessing. If you don't, you will simply live your life looking for the next gig, and you will never be satisfied or content. So there are 2 things I'm suggesting for all of us to do. One is to be grateful and thankful for everything that you have, every mundane, ordinary things that you have. Secondly, let us be a community that keeps each other accountable. Get curious about one another's spiritual life. Ask questions, not as a judgment and not because you're perfect, but because you're simply curious. And in your curiosity, you will spur someone else, or you will spur your own spiritual walk. Any one of us can sin. We're all capable. Even the best of us will sin, because we will all experience boredom, and we all, and it's never, we don't sin because our morality has been turned off. We're all capable of it. But in our sin, God turns our heart. He uncovers our sin, not to point fingers, but to transform our heart so that he can break our heart and we may transform. God's commitment to sinners is incredible. God committed to Saul, even though he knew that he was going to sin. God didn't commit to David because he knew that he was going to be he thought he was going to be perfect. No, he committed to all of them, even though he knew that they were going to sin. God didn't create Adam and Eve because he thought, oh, they're going to be a perfect little robots. No, he knew. He knew that he had to send his son to die for us, so that when we do sin, that we may confess our sins to him, and he can break our heart, that we can have a deep, repentant heart that once again longs for God and not longing for the things of the world, or think that we are perfect and we can do this without God. Brothers and sisters, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Let us not sin, but when we do sin, let us repent deeply. Rummage through your heart today to see if all the choices that you're making, all the choices that you have made, and how much of that is really for God. And are you living for the Lord, or are you just living for yourself? Because one day that tendency will land you in great trouble.